Hey guys, welcome to YZ Owl. My name is Siddhan Shekhar, and today we are on to our lecture 4 in our course to Introduction to Marketing. And today we'll be talking about the third step of creating a product. Now, before I get into the course material for today, if you'd remember, if you've seen the last video, if you haven't, go check it out. We'll link it in the description below. In the last lecture, we ended on a problem, and the problem was forecast the sales of a new toothpaste, the USP of which is the use of Ayurvedic herbs and is priced 5 rupees above the current market leader. So I hope you guys have given this a try and put down your answers in the comments below. And so I'm going to share with you one possible solutions. Now understand that there's no right or wrong answers in here. I'm giving you one approach. You can definitely try and go ahead with another approach. The approach I'm giving you is very simple. It's condensed. I've skipped out a lot of steps in this, but there are no right or wrong answers. I just want you to understand the logical train of thought that is followed whenever you are making a decision of this sort. So we start off by, asking the most general question. What's the population of India? Again, I'm assuming that we are operating just in India. If it's a global market, another that's an entirely different ball game then. So we start off by asking what's the population of India. Then we go on and ask ki how many people can afford to buy a toothpaste, because a lot of people, they either live in rural regions and prefer to use their datun sticks instead of a toothpaste. A lot of people cannot afford to buy a toothpaste. So once that is decided, then we talk about how many people care about a herbal toothpaste. Then we go in and ask what percentage of that market can we capture. For this, we need to understand how the competitors' hold of the market is on like. So for example, if 90% of the current market is satisfied with their current product that they are using, it's unlikely that they are going to change, especially at a higher price point. And then lastly, based on the usage volumes of the volume that we have calculated, how many units can we expect to sell, and that will give us the sales potential. Now understand, this is a very condensed answer. I've left out a lot of important things in this, and this is one approach you can take. There are lots of different approaches you can take. You can talk about, psychographic segmentation, about looking at what kind of products people use who also use a herbal toothpaste, what you can do to sorry, what you can do to make this sale to them, and so on and so forth. All right, having said that, let's move on to the course for today. So before I start, I have two important disclaimers to make over here. Firstly, when I'm talking about creating a product, I'm only talking about the marketing perspective of things. I'm not touching upon the product management side of things, because that's an entirely different beast and I don't want to get into that, because that's going to make things very complicated. So that's the first part. The second thing is that as we go on in this course now, the distinction between the steps is going to get a lot more blurry. For example, the very important concept that I'm going to talk about today of STP, different phases of that process belong to different steps. So for example, segmentation is a clearly a market analysis and market analysis part of the process, whereas positioning comes into communication and advertising, which is a much later part of the process. So as we go on in this course, the distinction between these processes and where they happen in the steps, that's going to get a lot more blurry, and this ambiguity is something that you need to learn to have to get comfortable with. Come on. So let's start off with the topic for today, STP, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. Now, I cannot stress upon how important of a process this is. Practically all of marketing begins here, no matter if you're trying to sell a toothpaste or a car, or if you're working for a small local retailer or a giant multinational company. Almost every marketing decision begins from the STP. So what do I mean by STP? STP is a short form of segmentation, targeting, and positioning. Now, what do those words mean? Segmentation is a division of the entire market into homogeneous groups based on one or more similar features. Now, these are two again key points over here: homogeneous groups, and then based on one or more similar features. So let me highlight these things: homogeneous groups and one or more similar features. Now, what do I mean by that? The homogeneous groups, it means that whenever I'm segmenting, I cannot take two people who belong to entirely different categories and plug them together and call that a segment. So for example, a 50-year-old man from Pune cannot be clubbed together with a 23-year-old woman from Patna, because that simply doesn't work out. And if it does work out, then it comes down to the second thing, the similar feature. We need to decide, or we need to find out what are the similar features between these two people. Maybe they belong to the same psychographic profile, maybe they have the same consumer buying behavior, whatever might that be. But these two things are absolutely essential when we are segmenting a market. Secondly, targeting. Now, deciding which of the segments is the most lucrative given the value proposition, company's core competencies, etc., etc. Now, once we are done with our segmentation exercise and we have identified, let's say, 5 different segments, not all five of those segments are going to be equally profitable. For example, you have identified a low income segment and a high income segment. But you know that given the volumes that you will be selling in both of these segments, the higher income segment is more profitable for you, or the lower income segment is more profitable for you, depending upon your numbers, of course. So in that case, you have to make a call that who are you going to target, which segment are you going to target. Now, obviously, you're targeting for a higher income group is going to be drastically different from the way you would target a lower income group. So this is where targeting comes in, where you have identified all possible segments and then you drill down and zero in on the one segment or the few segments that you think are going to be most lucrative for you. Third is positioning. Now, this is the act of designing the company's offering and image to occupy a distinctive place in the minds of the target market. Now, we obviously, there are a lot of brands and a lot of companies and a lot of products. Whenever the name of those are spoken, there is immediately a certain image that pops into our head, or a certain notion of that product that pops up into our head. So that is exactly what we're trying to do with position. I am trying to occupy mind space in the consumer's mind. So for example, let's say I have created a product called XYZ, and that XYZ is very well known for its safety features. So what I want to do is whenever a customer or a consumer hears XYZ, he or she immediately thinks of safety. Now, this could be n number of things, because when you are creating a product, you could have a lot of different features that you're proud of. But then you need to decide upon which one of these features do you want to concentrate your marketing on, which one of these do you want to concentrate your promotion and advertising on, and that becomes your positioning. All right, so let's move on and let's look at segmentation in a bit more detail. Now, there are different types of segmentations because, it's a very vast market, especially in a country like India. It's definitely a very diverse market, and using just one form of segmentation might not be the best idea every time. So what do I mean by that? So for example, there's geographical segmentation. What it means is that I'm segmenting my market based upon my geography. The very easy example would be, let's say you're a local supermarket who is trying to make a decision about its advertising. Now, I as a supermarket know that people who are more than 3 kilometers away from my supermarket are not going to come to buy from me. So I will concentrate my marketing efforts within those 3 kilometers, because I know that any money that I spend beyond those 3 kilometers, I'm not really going to get a return on them. In this case, there's a classic example of geographical segmentation. However, that's not all. There's also demographic segmentation. Within this, there are also a lot of subcategories. There's age and life cycle, there's gender, there's income, there's generational segments, there's social class. It could be n number of things on the basis of which you decide to segment your market. Now, each one of these has its own advantages as well as disadvantages. For example, if you take, let's say, income. So income gives you a very good idea of what the buying capacity or the purchasing power of a consumer is. However, what it does not tell you that whether or not that customer will be interested in your product. For that, you have to go into psychographic profiling of the customer. Similarly, if you talk about, let's say, age. So in age, if you, let's say, decide to market to 25-year-olds. Now, in that way, a 25-year-old man is very different from a 25-year-old woman in terms of their aspirations and features and qualities that they need from their product. Similarly, someone who's 25-year-old and has lived almost entirely in a metropolitan city as compared to someone who's 25 and lived almost entirely in a village, their aspirations and expectations are going to also be very different. So therefore, each one of these segmentations has their own advantages as well as disadvantages, and we as marketers need to come to an informed decision about which ones are the best for our use. Now let's move on to what is possibly my personal favorite method of segmentation, the psychographic segmentation. In this, what happens is that you define your segment on the basis of personality traits or values or beliefs or lifestyles. Now, what do I mean by that? So, for example, let's say there are two people who belong to different social classes and different income groups. However, they both aspire to be seen as as someone who is very adventurous. So in that case, your product is going to market itself and position itself as something that adventurous people do. Now, these two people, even though they are from different income and social classes, are still going to be gravitated towards their product because it helps them project their own image in a certain way. Now, this is why this is a very powerful tool that can be used for segmenting a market, and it's one that's gotten very popular with marketers, not just in the recent years, but for the last 2 or 3 decades. And then there's behavioral segmentation. Now, this is on the basis of knowledge or attitude and the use and response towards the product. Now, what do I mean by this? So, for example, I know as a behavioral thing, a customer who walks into, let's say, a supermarket has knowledge of, let's say, 5 different products. However, his attitude towards, let's say, three products is very bad. So then I try to identify why does this customer not like these 3 products, like two of those products, and then try and incorporate that learning into my own positioning efforts. So again, behavioral segmentation also very popular with marketers. However, the subjectivity that creeps into it is, sort of limiting its use, but that does not mean that people do not use it. It's used all across the board very often. Now let's talk about identifying profitable segments. Now we have already discussed how the market can be divided into n number of segments, but how do I know that a segment is profitable for me? So over there is a framework that is used, or it's a set of guidelines that is used. Your segment that you have identified needs to be 5 things. It should be measurable, it should be substantial, it should be accessible, differentiable, and actionable. Now, what do I mean by those things? Measurable. You need to be able to put an exact number or at least an approximate number onto that segment. So, for example, if I come up with my segment as people who want to be a superhero on the inside secretly. Now, until unless I can measure that and put up an exact number to it, that there are 2 million such people in my territory, that segment doesn't really do anything for me. It doesn't really give me anything. Second is substantial. It needs to be big enough. If my segment is comprised of just 100 people, I am not going to operate in that segment, because obviously it does not make sense for me to invest so much time and effort and money into creating a product that only 100 people are going to use. So the segment needs to be big enough. It needs to be substantial enough. Third is accessible. The segment that I have created, it needs to be very accessible. Now, it's pretty common sense that a segment which is made up of 20 to 35-year-old males in Delhi is going to be much more accessible than something on the basis of psychographic profiling. Because in that case, I don't know how far these people are, what channels of media do they consume through which I will be advertising to them, and so on and so forth. So accessibility is a major issue. Fourth is differentiable. I need to be able to differentiate between 2 segments. For example, if I have a segment A and I have a segment B, there needs to be unique identifying characteristics in each of them. So, for example, a segment which is made up of women and then a segment which is made up of men is differentiable, clearly. But then if a segment is made up of 40 to 55-year-old women and then a segment which is made up of 45 to 60-year-old women. Now, that's not really differentiable because there's a lot of overlap between these two. So, therefore, it needs to be differentiable. And last is actionable. I need to identify a segment on which I can act upon. If I identify a great segment, but it's so thinly spread out, if it's so inaccessible or it's so immeasurable that I can't act upon it, it doesn't really do me any good. Now let's talk about the segmentation approaches. Now there are a lot of different ways in which these segmentation decisions are taken on the basis of the overall strategy of the firm. Now let's talk about all of them one by one. There's the single segment concentration, which is like a very basic thing. You pick a segment, you stick to it. So for example, if you are a boiler manufacturing company, you pick your segment as steel making factories and you stick to them. That's it. There's nothing else to be talked about. The second is selective specialization, which is different products in different segments. Now, what it means is, let's say I am a giant, diversified multinational firm which operates in FMCG. So I could have a different product, as in a toothpaste, marketed towards a different segment, as well as a washing powder, which is marketed towards a different segment. Now, this is selective specialization where I can simultaneously operate in multiple segments by catering a product which is suited exactly for the needs of that particular segment. Third is product specialization, where I have the same product, but I can sell it to different segments. So, for example, I make trucks. So, let's say I make buses. So, I can make that sale to both government organizations as well as private transport organizations as well as schools. So I have a single product, a bus, but there are different segments in which I'm making these sales. Fourth is the market specialization, which is the exact opposite of product specialization, where I know a segment that well that I can create different products for it and then push all of my products towards that single segment. A very good example of this would be the software industry. Most of the software companies, they understand a market. For example, Adobe understands uh, graphic design and creative media very well. So it has a large number of products which are catered specifically to that target market, be it After Effects, be it Illustrator, be it Premiere Pro, whatever that might be. And then last is the full market coverage, which is basically I don't really think about a particular segment. I just aim my marketing towards everyone and anyone and then hope for the best. Now there are two different approaches within this as well. There's the undifferentiated marketing, and then there's a differentiated marketing. Undifferentiated marketing is basically I run the same ad for everyone. I run the same marketing communication. I run the same ads. I use the same marketing tools for the entire population. Now this is cheaper because I just have to build one marketing communication and then I use that everywhere. But at the same time, it's a lot less effective than differentiated marketing. In differentiated marketing, I create my let's say my marketing communication and advertising which are specifically catered to particular segments within my full market coverage. So for example, a very good example of this was Bonvita, the health drink made by Cadbury and now Mondelez. So these guys, what they did, that they came up with three different ads, and then these ads would run on different channels at different times based upon what the channel claimed to be the majority target audience for that program. And these three were based upon different social classes, different economic classes, and as a result their messages were very different. I'm pretty sure if you YouTube it, you can find these ads very easily. I'm pretty sure a lot of you already know what I'm talking about. It was done when Bonvita had released their small sachets of 20 rupees or 10 rupees each, something like that. So in that case, it was a full market coverage, but it was done with differential marketing, which was what made the campaign so effective and so memorable that we are still talking about it today, almost 15 years later after the campaign was ended. Now, I think we have talked a lot today. There's a lot of information to process. So I'm going to end this lecture over here. We'll come back for targeting and positioning in the next lecture. I'll try and finish both of them together in the lecture. If I can't, then we'll do another video on targeting and another on segmentation. I hope that you like the video. If you have any questions, feel free to comment them below and we'll answer them. And I'll see you guys in the next video.